you want to do it later, but. All right, I'm going to assume you see the raise hand button at the bottom and are just comfortable listening for now. We'll ask again around 6 o'clock. And with that, Kristen, we are looking forward to hearing from you. So you are up.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm really excited to share here and appreciate this process so much and the ability to learn from each other. I've definitely learned a lot. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. All right. So yeah, this is a presentation on the historical and cultural considerations of the Quinobequin, which we all know as the Charles River. Some folks may know that the traditional name described as this river is Quinobequin, which from my understanding and learning and lessons really has to do with kind of the meandering and twisty, curvy nature of the river. And yeah, this photo was taken in the Millis area. And it's a very significant river to myself and to my kin, and I will be able to share more about that as we move through. So a little, this is going to be an introduction to myself. I really want to be clear with the kind of perspective that I'm bringing. I first identify as a Nipmuc person. Nipmuc is people of the fresh water. Nipi is our traditional word for water. This is a description of who freshwater or Nipmuc people are that was taken from the website of Nipmuc Indian Development Corporation. So yeah, basically we are born into this multitude of lakes, streams, and rivers. It's really difficult to talk about cultural perspectives of Native people without really going back to some of our cosmovision. You know, as we heard from Suzanne, we're talking 10,000 plus years of living in this place that date back to the glacier period. We are most affiliated with the Eastern Woodland period, which is really where we transitioned to agricultural use. And that was also a period of contact, of colonial contact. And so much of how we identify today is really rooted in trying to preserve those traditions and continue on and learn as much about pre-contact and what we know about the way our ancestors lived as much as possible. Oftentimes these cosmovisions mirror geological processes in the landscape. So it's not just Nipmuc people, it's most Indigenous people all over the globe. A really interesting statistic for Indigenous territories is that 80% of the world's biodiversity is actually in the territory of Indigenous peoples. And hopefully I can communicate a little bit as to why that might be by sharing a little bit about our perspective and our worldview, which is just inherently kind of different than what we found when folks were settling in this area during the contact period. So those cosmovisions tell a lot about our place within this network of waterways and relationships. And as a Nipmuc person, it's really difficult for me to see myself as apart from that. That's why we're literally named after the places that we come from. We are a land-based people, and we also understand the sacredness of water. The water is actually part of the cosmovision. If anybody's familiar with Robin Kimmerer, an Anishinaabe Ojibwe writer, she writes the books Braiding Sweetgrass. It's very well known in the non-native community. A lot of, she's a biologist, and so a lot of plant enthusiasts and scientists have been picking up the book and reading about the kind of cultural, traditional ecological knowledge that Robin Kimmerer is bringing. And she talks about the story of Sky Woman, which is a cosmovision of Haudenosaunee beliefs, but very, very similar to how we would understand our relationship to this particular area. So the map that you see there is a listing of traditional villages of the tribal folks that come from this area. We can call it Nipmuc, we can call it Natick, Nipmuc, Massachusetts. Those are the two tribal communities that the Quinobequin is part of. And as you will see, most of these village sites were located on riverways. So yeah, literally water is life for our people. And there was a very big reason why we would situate ourselves in these riverways. And so even listening to the conversation around archaeological sites, and then just knowing that a lot of hobbyists actually find their hobbies in riverbeds, I think it's really important for us to also consider the possibilities of this being a site. And I can talk a little bit later about my perspectives and what Suzanne presented on. But yeah, this very much shaped who we are socially, economically, politically, and even though the landscape has changed drastically, we still are shaped by that in many ways. I identify as Natick. I am a descendant of Josiah Speen, who's one of the original proprietors. So my great-grandfather, John Thomas, is a descendant of the Speens, and those names are well documented in colonial history, Josiah being one of the original proprietors that did the land grant with John Eliot. My grandmother also married into the Mashpee Wampanoag community. And so in many respects, I feel like I've been raised both in the freshwater environment as well as the coastal. I actually live at Nantasket Beach. And I can talk a little bit too about the significance of living in that particular area based on my identity as a Natick person. So yeah, I think it's really important. I'm not very comfortable with talking about myself, but I think it's really important for me to share the perspective that I'm bringing tonight. As you've seen, I'm a member of the Natick Nipmuc Indian Council, which is a political decision-making body that's been around for several decades. And I'm also just mostly speaking as a Nipmuc person. These images all represent parts of my professional, cultural, lived experience background, and I can share a little bit more about that. But I think it's really important for me to share first that through all of this learning for the past 20 years or more that I've been involved with my tribal community after graduating from UMass Amherst, where I studied political science, legal studies, and Native American studies. Through all of this, I had a really interesting journey, probably like the Quinobequin, a lot of twists and turns. But I've realized how much of this work has really related to our food systems and to just my identity as a granddaughter of a traditional leader. Marianne Hendricks, who has passed on, is really why I got involved in the work. So it's very much generational, but I'm also a mother and a youth worker and an educator. And I feel connected to this landscape and feel I have a responsibility to continue to be the voice of the cultural perspectives of the people that I come from. So I was born in Worcester, which is Nipmuc country. And I was raised in Framingham. I lived right off of Old Con Path, which is a traditional pathway of Nipmuc people. I didn't really realize my identity through that portion of growing up. And it wasn't until I was around other tribal folks at school, at university, that I realized the connection that I had growing up in the waterways and how much time I spent in the brooks and the streams and felt at home there. And now I really understand why. After leaving college, I decided to work for the Boston Harbor Islands National Park. As you can see up in the corner of the screen, the image you probably are all familiar of in the Natick Post Office of the depiction of the apostle to the Indians and the story of our removal from Natick, our forced removal from Natick, which happened in the middle of the night of October 30th, 1675, where we were forced by chains and shackles through proclamation of the Mass Bay Colony to be removed to Deer Island, which at that time was not connected to the mainland. It was an island. And the reasons for this, even though we were quote unquote friendly Indians and building relationships with the English settlers. During the height of King Philip's War, there was just a lot of conflict and confusion and just, I would say, a lot of chaos, where we became a threat as a people. And so being a praying community, we were most easily vulnerable to being dispossessed from that place. And so the Quinobequin also became a place of deep sadness and pain, as we had to be taken by that river to Boston Harbor. So after work, so that's probably what brought me to Nantasket. You know, folks can say that Deer Island and the islands where we have burial sites from that removal is a painful place. But I believe, you know, geologically speaking, it's a very magical place. And there's some reason why I feel a strong connection to this area. So I live at Nantasket and I worked for the Boston Harbor Islands for close to over 5 years, and then decided to go study at UNH to extend that experience of working with the National Park Service, Department of Conservation Recreation, City of Boston. It's a multi-agency partnership. I did a lot of youth work in advocating for youth of the urban areas to have access to the outdoors, but I was mainly there to connect with that aspect of my identity, but also to be an advocate to make sure our voices were represented at the decision-making table. That particular park has a mandate, legislative mandate, to include Indigenous perspectives, and it goes beyond just the federal recognition criteria to include those folks that are not federally recognized with the most historical connections to that place, which would be the Nipmuc and the Massachusetts people. So at UNH, I studied environmental conservation, and I focused on integrating Indigenous knowledge into the management of ecosystems. I did a participatory study action on that. It included archaeologists, academics, the National Park Service scientists, community members. I really had the desire to not just produce something that would sit on shelves, but to actively do something to have a more equitable approach to engaging with the landscape. Through that experience, I guess I should also to explain the image that you are seeing of the folks in the canoes through the Natick Nipmuc Indian Council that started the annual Deer Island ceremony. We go out every October and we commemorate the forced removal on the 30th, and we paddle across Boston Harbor and back up Charles River to the furthest navigable point, which is the spot in Brighton Community Rowing. And then we finish the journey by foot, running and walking all the way back to the dam. And we do that every October, no matter what the weather is. Last year, because of COVID, we didn't gather, but I, in the snowstorm, took that journey by foot because we couldn't paddle across the harbor. So all through Winthrop, Chelsea, Revere, Somerville, and then we would relay the rest of the journey. So I say that to share, there's a very active and ongoing relationship that we have and we have not forgotten, even though it's a very interesting experience for us to be journeying back and still experience life as normal going on around us. So there's duck boats honking at us, there's crews from BU and Harvard telling us we're going the wrong way down the river. And it's just a really interesting experience. We have lots of laughs, and then there's tears, and there's pain, and there's deep commemoration and an offering back. We always say that no matter what our pain is during that journey, it pales in comparison to what my ancestors experienced. And this is kind of the least we could do to try to be in right relationship. The images of the food, those are huckleberries from Nipmuc territory, and we have reclaimed our white flint corn. So anybody familiar with the petitions of the praying Indians in Natick will know that we were actively petitioning the Mass Bay colony for better planting conditions and so that we could plant our corn. If you think about it, October is actually a time of celebrating harvest. We would have just been getting our food stored for the winter. We would not have been abandoning our food storage. So our removal was also an intentional act of starvation of our people. And you can see from the petitions that we were actively trying to protect our collective food system. So basically, we lived in small family bands, but we had a very much a worldview of everybody coming, sourcing from a common pot, a shared mutuality. It wasn't about private property. It wasn't about ownership or power over. We literally saw ourselves as responsible kin to feeding each other and making sure that we don't go without, because we knew based on oral history and based on our cosmovisions that those were our ways that we could be healthy and sustained. And so when I talk about the food sources, I will talk about the fish. I know that came up in another meeting. We see them as kin, and actually that we learn from them how to be in right relationship. And so when we see those sources being destroyed, we understand that those are indicative of our own struggles and challenges and lack of health. And I think COVID pandemic is a very great example of how we would see in our cosmovisions that type of sickness and illness, which is literally, it means it's a disease, that we are not at ease, and that we should be thinking a very different way of living and being in relationship with the natural world. Any sort of research around climate justice and trends of where we're going, COP26 is happening right now, and there's a whole mandate around deforestation. Like, it's very real, and I think that there is a lot of alignment with Indigenous worldviews and the way scientists and ecologists are seeing we need to shift our thinking for the health and well-being of the whole planet. My full-time job, I work for a grassroots technical support organization. So I do a lot of support around social movements struggling towards food sovereignty. So there is a palm tree there that is not from Natick. That is from attending a international conference on people affected by dams. That was one of my first onboarding experiences with my organization at Why Hunger, where we went to Panama. And there were over 20 Latin American countries represented with very varying experiences of how their lives have been affected by dams and transnational corporations and interests. And so that's an image of the Panama Canal, but I really feel like it's indicative of the way that commodification of the landscape, that industry have actually kind of bulldozed its way with very little understanding of the environmental impacts that will come in years to follow. So, there's a consideration here that we have an opportunity when the fish aren't running to this particular part of the river, and we know that this particular dam isn't necessarily the reason why, but it's the concept of prioritizing money and industry without truly understanding the way that we might be impacting the livelihoods of people in the future. And that's very evident, I feel like. Anyway, yeah. So there's all sorts of these experiences that are combined with the perspectives that I'm bringing today. Yeah, I mean, there's the Watertown Dam right there. The image of the herring is actually a herring run in Weymouth. But I bring this up to say, if any of you did the pre-reading and the article around damming Indians and fish and starvation and dispossession, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend understanding this perspective of what's occurred in the past and the way that the Indigenous community had actively petitioned and voiced in public record their opposition to the dams, and the way that the colonial government handled the legalities that they tried to implement around protecting the fish stock, and the ways that Indigenous people were kind of dismissed in their voice and their concern about it. And here we are a couple hundred years later. I can't underscore the significance of being able to share any of this knowledge with you and be a voice on behalf of the people I come from, that 200 years ago and more were asking that this not happen. And that article very clearly makes a connection between the dispossession and land loss for a variety of complex reasons that we don't often think of. And it makes an interesting point as well, the way English property was protected like cattle, but the fish weren't. And so even though it was said in another meeting that we might not get the fish run, I'm urging us to kind of understand this longer trajectory that I'm bringing up with the cosmovision and how we see our responsibility as Indigenous people today as a very long term. I mean, who would have ever thought my ancestors that I'd be speaking here a couple hundred years later about the potential removal of one of those dams. And I'm encouraging us to think long term about the possibility of that fish being revived, because we don't give up that hope as Indigenous people. We will never give up that hope. We know that all things are possible, and our last presentation was very clearly a reminder of that when we talk about how removal of the dams can, it can take just a matter of a couple of hours for restoration to begin. So let's consider what could happen in the long term. And, we know when those fish come back, that there's a healthy, thriving environment. It might take more time before we're able to source that fish and have that nutrient back in our lives, and to be able to provide also that article very clearly makes the connection between our fish sources and soil health and our ability to grow that corn and reclaim that flint. So yeah, you see that image there of my daughter planting that corn, and much of what I'm doing is not just for my own children, but for the youth of our communities to have the ability to source food that's culturally relevant and healthy and nutritious for themselves, and to push through the environmental degradation we've done that makes that impossible for them right now. So I'll just close with, I'll close with this, and then I'm just going to share a couple thoughts about Suzanne's presentation. So the notion that Indigenous peoples have a sovereign right to food has been affirmed in an array of instruments created by international governmental and non-governmental alliances, including the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which specifies the range of rights required for the full exercise of food sovereignty, paying particular attention to the connections between the right to cultural self-determination and the right to maintain and protect seeds and land. So this was a piece from The River is in Us, which is by Elizabeth Hoover. She's a scholar who's very active in food sovereignty movement, but this particular book was about the pollution of the St. Lawrence River and the industries there, and the PCBs and the ways that was affecting the tribal community there. So this isn't this is a very common issue for Indigenous peoples. There's still continued fight in pushing back Line 3, which is affecting the Anishinaabe folks up in the northwest portion of the United States. We are asking for a transition out of industry that's continuing to deplete our sacred resources so that we can continue to survive as a people. Couple more considerations about Suzanne. It was very clear that she's coming from a compliance regulatory mandate, but what's absent of that is kind of the, well, not completely absent, I'm sure, but the considerations around moral and ethics and tribal sovereignty, as well as just the idea of environmental justice and the people who belong to this place. So a couple of things to keep in mind. There are regulations over what would be considered something that would stop a project, or what would be considered a historical artifact that would be worthy of stopping a project. But as somebody that actively engages young people of our communities and our foodways, any sort of artifact that may be unearthed and uncovered is meaningful, because it's a connection for these young people who live in a world that tells them they don't exist, to have that connection to their past. And there's all sorts of ways we could be creative and go beyond the mandates in this situation where we could want to include tribal youth or tribal folks in the monitoring process so they have an opportunity to learn the science behind this and what goes into a project like this. But even here in this image of a Mishoon, which is a traditional canoe of our people, we're talking about the pines, and there's been other digs that I've been aware of or construction projects that I've been aware of in Nipmuc territory where there would have been opportunity for us when trees are cut down, not to just chop them up into firewood, but to allow us to teach our young people how to burn the Mishoon. Yeah, there's just all sorts of ways that we could be creative and think beyond the box of how we're inclusive and how we are also supportive of the local Indigenous community and learning about their culture. So that is about it. And I appreciate you all for your openness in what I was sharing. I'm looking forward to hearing from David as well.
Thank you very much, Kristen. I think David was just going to speak briefly, so I would like to give him the floor and then we'll open this up for discussion. Just want to say again, Kristen, thank you for your honesty and openness with all of us. We really appreciate it. David Yancey.
Mona, can you hear me?
We can.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm on a phone. I just got back from work. Again, to the group, I'm David Yancey. I was born and grew up in Natick. My heritage is Nipmuc, with the ancestors living in Natick dating back to the 1600s, late 1600s, early 1700s. As a spokesperson, along with Kristen, speaking for the Nipmuc people, we all think that the spillway should be removed so the flow of the river can open back up. Realistically, we understand that removing the dam/spillway will not immediately bring the fish back up the river, but referencing Mr. Wildman's example of building a sidewalk, that's sometimes how it's done. Is, you build it piece by piece until all the pieces are connected over time to support a completed sidewalk. In this case, we're looking for the river to be clear from the start all the way down to the harbor. And by doing our bit by bit piece of removing the spillway at the Charles River Dam at Natick, that's our piece of the puzzle. So again, I'm not going to take up a lot of time, but that's what I wanted to basically clue in on. Is as the Native Nipmuc people, we support wholeheartedly removing the dam, removing the spillway. That's all I had.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right, everybody. The floor is open. Committee thoughts, reflections, things that were new for you hearing. We have a nice period of time now to think together and be together. Yeah, Becca, go ahead.
So I think there's pieces here that I think are interesting perspective that I had in mind before, but I think it sort of coalesced in sort of the long view. And this came up at the last meeting. And Kristen, I appreciate what you were saying too, and both for you and David, sort of the history that you have with your ancestors in Natick going back a long time, and then also the vision for the future, and how we can think both short term for the youth in our community now and then long term. And so I think, as I hear people talk about the dam, there's this history of the dam, but how the history of the river and the future of the river is just a different time scale. So that just struck me. Thanks.
Thank you. Others? Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen and David. It was great to hear. Knowing the perspective and being a student of history, it's one thing knowing it, but hearing it from your perspective is powerful for sure. I'm just the thought around, the reason I got into or got involved in this, seeing the two choices that were kind of in front of us, I thought neither one was something that Natick would be happy with. So, when framed as they were, and I know the possibility of what we can do. And so I liked your thoughts, Kristen, on kind of the creativity that maybe we need to look at these things, and whether we repair, are we removing trees at that point? I liked your point there. Or whether we repair or eliminate the spillway. There's going to be a lot of land and restoration. Certainly the natural restoration will happen, but there's a lot of people that live here, and people are going to want to use this wonderful place. And how do we make that possible while we're respecting, the history? So I'm so glad that both your voices are involved on wherever path we go to. That there's certainly a lot of historical significance. I've even heard the spillway itself is a historical thing. So I think looking at, if we do go the restoration of the river pathway, it's not just simply remove the spillway and move on with our lives. I think there's a real possibility that we can make this park respect the incredible history of the praying Indians, and I mean, that is Natick. I look forward to maybe hearing more as we drill down to the details and get our advice across to the board. I hope your voice is a big part of it, and thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Others? What do you take from what you heard? What new? What are you curious about? There.
So to repeat everyone's thanks for Kristen and David, it was really very educational presentation, and the perspective of Native Americans and Native peoples is one that's often overlooked. And I'm really happy that we can have it be such an important part of this process. I am obviously coming at things from a very ecological and wetlands perspective, and I think that hearing more about the history of how Native peoples used these ecosystems and interacted with these ecosystems and lived with these ecosystems is an important thing that should be sort of incorporated into everyone's thought processes, because we've been seeing a lot of comments about how the dam and the spillway are this beautiful historic location in Natick, and I think we have to think about what we're willing to trade off for that industrialized view of beauty in terms of the impacts to the ecosystem that are surrounding that, especially with our country facing and our area facing such a massively changing climate, and how this feature, whether it's removed or not, is going to impact our community as the climate changes, and how we can ensure that our community is as resilient as possible to those changes. And so I just wanted to sort of reconnect these discussions to the ecological discussions that we had at the last meeting, because I think, people and the environment we work as one system, and we are greatly impacted by the changes in our environment. So how can we view this spillway discussion from a lens of what is going to make us the most connected with the environment in a way that makes us the most resilient to how that environment is changing?
Thank you. Martin, go ahead.
Yeah, again, thank you for the presentation, and I'm trying to kind of take it all in. And I guess what I'm trying to work out though is, I clearly get that the people, the Native Americans were harmed tremendously by what happened 400, 300 years ago, including their livelihood. But in terms of how we're going to make that right, we're no longer in a fishing economy or an agricultural economy. So how would people be benefit by going back to restoring the river? How would that actually make things right in a sense?
I'm going to just say, Kristen or David, if you want to respond to any of this at any time, this can be a dialogue, and you're invited to, if and when you are so moved.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Yeah, I guess I see it differently. I think we might be, I'm in the food business, the business of restoring localized food economies, and economies might look very different. Like I think traditionally pre-contact, it was very much a mutual reciprocal exchanged economy, what a lot of people in social movements today are calling solidarity economies. But I think the agricultural industry is hands down one of the largest contributors to CO2 emissions. Like we're not going to survive with that level of that kind of outdated thinking, or that thinking that clearly is just continuing to extract from our natural world and have adverse impact on human health and environmental health. So I think where I witness on a daily, people restoring localized food economies, and it's my lived reality. I'm part of a collective of folks that grow food, not for money, but to feed each other. And we're fortunate that we have access to seed exchange and resources and private landowners who are sharing their planting fields. We have local fisher folk that continue to source fish, and we exchange that fish all the way up to tribal communities in northern Maine and parts of Canada. So being part of a network like that, where we are figuring out ways to source nutritional, culturally appropriate food that moves a little bit beyond cash-based economy. We don't have solutions. I don't think we've ever been here collectively in this diverse moment of human beings to be saying what the future might hold. But I think we're finding that that we can't continue as is. And so again, an opportunity to see what, like David was saying, those sidewalks that are built, what we're capable of based on what we know from where we've come from, combined, right, with that viewpoint being Indigenous and then also being folks that have settled here for a few hundred years now. And David, yeah, I don't know if you want to add.
Let's go to Jillian. And David, you can jump in anytime. Jillian, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to, well, thank you for your presentation. Ona, I thought since we're hearing from our Nipmuc representatives, it might worth noting that we do also have a representative from the Praying Indians in Natick, Chief Caring Hands, and she was invited to speak today. I just wanted to have the community understand that she is participating.
Thank you. That's right. And I've spoken with her, and we'll just share that one of her major interests in whatever happens here is around like signage and acknowledgement of history in whatever happens at this place. So thanks for that prompt, Jillian. Terry, go ahead.
Thank you. Really just wanted to say, I think folks have covered things really well, but I think one point that Kristen called out that's important when we talk a great deal about 1651, about the 17th century, but a reminder of an Indigenous presence that goes back thousands of years before that, that Natick started in the 17th century, but that there has been a human presence and a community presence of sorts along this river. And I think a lot of her comments kind of reach deeply into that. We think of kind of our start as magically appearing in 1651 without always taking into account this larger and longer presence. And just a brief note to Kristen to say, love the article in the Boston Globe on your food work. So, thank you.
Thank
Great.
you.
What else? Anybody who hasn't had a chance yet to share what you're thinking want to go? I feel like every conversation we have, we go kind of deeper. And I feel like now we've got the 10,000, like with the 10,000 years, that's on time. I don't know, pretty good. And I like the extending forward piece and the kind of creativity element that keeps coming up in different conversations also. Bill, go ahead.
Thank you. I want to say thank you, Kristen, for the presentation. The idea of thousands of years of history is kind of humbling, and the idea that we also got in the beginning with the archaeological information that we may get out of this as part of this project, and will likely get out of this as part of this project, is really kind of fascinating. But I have to say, at the very end, Kristen, you really like twanged at my curiosity as far as like building a machine, and I'd really like to be part of that. And there may just be 62 trees that need machines made out of them. I don't know. However, that really, as a woodworker, that's something that would really interest me. I'd really like to see that process and understand that. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Bill. I did just want to share that there is a historic moment happening now in Nipmuc community where they are doing an active burning of a machoon out in Ashfield, Massachusetts, and I will try to share what information I can have. I can gather about that. I think there was an article in the Recorder about it. But yeah, that is happening right now.
Awesome. How do you spell machoon?
I'll type it in, yeah. Thanks.
All right, quieter committee members. I know sometimes it's just nice to listen and absorb, but I also want to make space for you if you want to share. Kristen, thanks for that. That's not how I was spelling it.
I will speak. I just appreciate so much the history that you brought to this discussion. And I do feel so ashamed of the treatment of the Native Americans, of course. But I am also ashamed now because I do love that dam, and I love the beauty that it has brought to Natick, and that the community, as I understand it, loves what it provides in terms of landmark quality. So I'm torn, but it's clear to me what the right thing to do is. I just thought I would say that to you. Thank you for your talk, Kristen and David.
Thank you, Janine, for sharing the challenge and the challenges here.
Hey, Ona, this is Dave again.
Yeah.
Yeah, earlier I was talking to a muted phone, so I'm sorry. One of the comments I wanted to get back to, I think Martin brought it up. How can we make it correct? How can we correct it? I think I look at it, my focus is more on the beauty of the river, not the beauty of the artificial structure that we put on it. And I think if we try to define beauty, like was mentioned earlier, or aesthetics, you get into everybody's opinion. But my focus is not, I don't want the dam. My focus is we need to open up the river, however we can do that. So I just wanted to make that comment. It's more, my focus is more on the river itself, not on the structures that we have on it. And I think we should honor the river. That's all I have.
Thank you. That is like, I think the real opportunity of having this many people together is the opportunity to change our lens, right? We all come in seeing things with a certain frame and we broaden that, and it transforms kind of together. Thank you. Or I'm trying to think who hasn't spoken. David, please, or David Bodding. I'm probably not seeing everybody. Jeremy. We can, in a few minutes, see if there are members of the public who want to speak. And, but anybody else have anything on your mind before I make that pivot for us? And feel free to chime back in if you already spoke. I don't want to silence any of you. Feels very reflective right now to me, to the extent that you can read a group over Zoom, which we try to do, but imperfectly. Wonderful. Thank you all. I think we're going to be sitting with this and thinking about this going forward and keep weaving together our understanding of what the implications are here of what we're doing together. I think then we'll go to public comment unless anyone thinks we should be doing something different. All right, members of the public, we are really happy to hear from you. We would invite you to share for, a few minutes. I don't think we have many of you, but 2-3 minutes. And we are taking notes and we appreciate your thoughts. And we know many of you have submitted written comments, and a reminder, those are always welcome. And if you'd like us to share comments with the full committee, you can email them to Maggie. And if you address your message to the full committee, we know we're supposed to forward it to everybody so everyone can read those. So Lawrence Slotnick, I see a hand. I'm going to allow you to speak, and the floor is yours for public comment.
Okay, do I have to start my video too?
I don't think you can. Can he? Or he just doesn't have to. Maggie?
Nope, Lawrence, we're just gonna hear your voice.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Larry Slotnick. I live just upstream of the dam on Route 16. And I just wanted to briefly raise a point that, as I understand the history, the first bridge where Pleasant Street is was built by the indigenous communities. It was a stone bridge, and then later it has developed into what it is now. Just that there is a history of indigenous infrastructure on the river as well, and that if you look back thousands of years, obviously the river was one thing, but as time moved on, the history, including the history of indigenous people, the uses of the river changed. So, the presentations today were certainly reflective of the history going back a long time, but there's also history moving forward, and I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you so much. Anybody else who is observing as a member of the public want to share thoughts at this point? Let's take Joel L. next. Joel, you may speak now. Joel, you're up. Can you hear us? I'm gonna let Now I'm losing the screen control. I think there was another person who was speaking. Maggie, did you just promote somebody to speak, or did she might have taken down her hand? Oh, Candy, I see you. I see your hand raised going up and down. I'm going to promote you and invite you to speak.
I sent a message.
There you are.
I live off of Route 16 and had probably an idea that may have been discussed before, but my idea is to bring out the upper, berm is the wrong idea, but whatever that's called, on the upper side, earthen dam, back into the water with landfill that can be grassed over for beautiful area. And it perhaps gets free landfill from some of the construction that we're doing, lots of. On the lower side of the dam, of the spillway dam and everything, I also suggest that you bring that fill into the lower side to meet up with the Pleasant Street Dam, not coming all the way up to the street level, but keeping it low enough so that you can have another sitting area. And what you've then done is doubled the size for the community itself to use the area. You've been able to leave the trees, you've been able to leave the spillway, and you've also alleviated the need for getting every 2 years an expensive analysis of the hazardous condition that we now have now. Thank you,
Candy.
Thank you.
And then Karen Malazi, I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly. You may speak now.
I just wanted to agree with the ideas about the machoon and other materials that may or may not come up if we either repair or remove the dam. I think it'd be good to keep in mind that some of these don't have to turn into trash where we're always using up and discarding. I'd like to, going forward, see some of those materials, whether they're trees or whatever, if the indigenous community has a use for those, that is remembered and offered to them.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public? Joel, can we try you again? Do you want to make public comment? Maybe not. Mark, go ahead.
Hi, this is actually Mia Kafitz, just have the wrong name on there. But I just wanted to say that I appreciate Kristen and David's comments. And, you know, when they're talking about widening the horizon and we're looking back at history that goes back thousands and thousands of years, that when we're thinking about the river today, we're also thinking forward into the future. And I think that was a point that Kristen made about kind of moving forward and generations forward as well. And that we've come to the point where we're learning from the past. We see the effect that the damming had on the river, and to think about what we're going to say to our kids and our grandkids when we know that we're presented with the opportunity to make a change now that would be ecologically better, more respectful of how history, and when I say history, you know, really far back history, it's just something that we need to think about going forward for the generations coming forward as well.
Thank you very much. Anybody else from the public? All right. Thank you all so much for that. I'm going to shift us into next steps, and then we'll do round robin with the committee and give everybody a last chance to share anything on your mind. Next steps, kind of reminders at this point, the field trip on Monday. There's information on the committee webpage, 10 a.m. The abutters meetings are happening next week, so committee and everyone else will get summaries of that. And thanks to those of you who are helping with those. And we look forward to talking and meeting with people who are very close to the river and getting that perspective in particular, as many of you and also many members of the public instructed us to do this summer when we were thinking about the process. We will write up notes from today and share those. And we will, our next topics are legal, kind of the legal side at the end of November, and then community use, right? What people want to see, recreation in December with a community input phase then. So that's upcoming. Again, to the committee or anyone in the public who is listening, if you have suggestions for people who we'd like to hear from when we talk about community use, I think it may be that that is largely what the public shared and what you all share. You know, it's like what you want to experience there. I don't know how much outside expertise you want or need, but it's an invitation to think about that if you want to. And any other next steps anybody can think of? Maggie, I think you can take that down. Thank you. All right. Great. We are going to do some round robin. Somebody called it something else I liked recently, but I forgot what it was. I'm going to call on each of you and give you the floor, and you can pass or just say thank you. You know, any closing comments or thoughts? I'm going to go backwards by last name. No, it's easier by first name with you all, right? Backwards by last name, because that's how I have it on my list. Sorry. That actually puts David, Yancey, and then Kristen to get us going.
Well, as far as this is Dave again, really thank you for everybody's time to hear me say my piece. Again, I'm not trying to be against anything. Just I'm throwing all my support behind something else. So I just support the river 100%. I know there was comments about the indigenous people putting some bridges across, but they didn't block the river. So I'm just saying that, you know, I don't want to undo something that causes problems later on, but I do want to throw my support behind the river. That's all I have.
Thank you. Kristen and then Jillian.
Yeah, fully agree on that, and just supporting the river 100%. There's other parts of the world where they're giving rivers rights, the same as corporations or individuals would have them. And I think it just brings a really important perspective. And yeah, I think likewise with what David's saying, you know, any sort of cultivation or management or stewardship of that river, whether it be through fish weirs or stones or any things like that, I think it all comes down to worldview and perspective as well, and the relationality, like the deep relationship of reciprocity. So I think, I mean, we could go crazy to think about all the ways that we may have done things that are considered wrong. But at the end of the day, it wasn't really driven from a power over the particular resource, which is what industry has done. Industry has prioritized human capital, wealth over the value that we place on all of these natural systems. And they're inherently beautiful. They're just, you know, talk about aesthetics, like there's nothing more beautiful than how this earth was created and the ways that it shifted over time. Again, just like the Quinobequin, just like the way that it twists and turns and isn't uniform, right? So yeah, I hope that we see beauty in that. and appreciate the opportunity to share this perspective. I was a bit nervous, and I'm glad it's over. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer. There's just a lot of pressure there, but I hope everybody realizes the historic moment that was witnessed here too, especially considering in that article it mentions that public record was dissolved, or the outcome of the court case with the petition of my ancestors disappeared. So it's pretty significant that this is on record, and appreciate being in community with you all through this process. And David, thank you so much for contributions tonight.
Thank you, Kristen. Jillian, and then Becca.
Hi, thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I apologize that my video wasn't on the whole time. There's two of me right now. I'm the panelist. I've had some problems with my battery. So I just wanted you to know I've been listening. I was listening sometimes on my phone, and I did hear everything that was said, and I really appreciate it being shared. And I'm so grateful that we have your perspective on this committee, and that our community is prioritizing that in how we design our committees. So I'm grateful for that. I also, I've been thinking a lot this week and listening to what you shared today about the long-term vision. And as most of in my role as a sustainability director for the town, I also am trying to envision a different future than the kind of future we have right now in terms of how we're where our energy is coming from and the emissions that we produce as a community. And I'm working on realizing a vision where we're a net zero community, and that we have a plan in Natick that was unanimously endorsed by all of our boards for that. And I think that kind of aligns with the thinking that Kristen and David shared about thinking long-term. And I feel like as a world, we have some really big changes that are going to be happening in the next couple of decades. And I think it's exciting that we have an opportunity to influence this decision in Natick. So that's all I have to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Becca, and then Claire.
So I think as I was taking notes on some things that came up, one of the first things that I jotted down was, Kristen, I think you used the word prioritizing at some point, and I know Jillian just used it too. And I think there's this question around what and who are we, and how are we prioritizing things on this question? And David, just now you talked about prioritizing the river, and I feel that this meeting today to me has felt like a shift in talking instead of me, it's my individual place. There's a community feel to this conversation, and a historical feel, and a future-y feel. So this conversation feels like a shift to me that's more community focused, and I hope that shift stays in our conversation, but I just wanted to note that, and I appreciate that. That's it.
Thank you, Becca. Claire, and then Karen.
A repeated thank you. Today's presentation was fantastic. I know I already said it was very educational for me. I hope it was very educational for everybody who's attending. This is the issue of food sovereignty, and the issue of rights to resources is one that is going to be ever more present in our communities, as I mentioned, as our climate changes. Before coming to Massachusetts, I grew up in Ohio on Lake Erie, a lake that was recently granted rights, as Kristen mentioned, because of the toxic algae blooms that were impacting the communities along the lake. So I think just sort of encouraging people to look at the resources around them, think about how they want them to be preserved and how they want them to be referenced in the future. Do we want the Charles River, the Quinobequin, to continuously be referred to as a dammed river, or do we want it to be a river that is, reverting to its natural state and really helping our communities maintain resiliency?
Thank you. Karen, and then Bill.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for everybody that presented tonight, Suzanne, Kristen, David. It's definitely eye-opening on all accounts. But as a recreation and Parks Director, obviously I see a lot of opportunities. I would love for Kristen and David to provide input as we go forward of what kind of recreational activities that you all have in mind for whatever the decision is on this. You know, whether it's interpretive signage, whether it's building canoes. I'm all for that. We could start doing that on a Saturday. We'll have a canoe. So, you know, and I agree with Becca too, is I mean, I've been in a lot of community meetings, and this just feels like the right kind of meeting. It just feels there's more sense of community. It's a more equitable decision, whatever is going to be decided, bringing everybody involved, getting everybody's input. I mean, obviously we always know that we'll never 100% get everybody on board with whatever's decided, but having everybody in the conversation, I believe is so important. And again, I've been in many meetings, and this is the first time that, you know, Kristen, your courage to step up and speak on this, because, you know, you said you were nervous, but to take that step, I applaud you and thank you, because the information is so critical. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Bill, and then Jeremy.
Thank you, Ona. Again, thank you to the members of the committee who sat and listened to this. Again, this is very eye-opening for me. And having read the article, realized that the original dam, the very original dam that was first put up, was petitioned by the Native Americans at the time, and their appeal was basically disregarded. They basically went through the system, and the system just did not pay any attention to them. So seeing that's just kind of, it's embarrassing, but that they tried to do this, you know, within the rules of our game, and it didn't work. So I really appreciate the lesson in history, and the lesson in history that I got outside of this through the homework. And I appreciate that, Kristen. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy, and then David Lotting. Wait, did we lose Jeremy? We lost Jeremy. David Lotting, and then Seth.
Hi, thanks. That was really interesting presentation. So I grew up in Worcester, Mass, on Quissett Street, and I rode my bike to neighboring streets of Wamsutta and Iroquois. So I have that minimal awareness of tribal heritage in this area. So it's been very interesting. I'm not sure how I'm thinking about it, and it'll be interesting to see how we process this. Thanks.
Thank you. Seth, and then Martin.
Hi, I thought the presentations were wonderful. It provided information that I think is very important for us to think about. And I don't think we would have if we didn't have these presenters. Additionally, there's a real opportunity for us to provide the history of the area, and when we do decide what we want the park to look like. And I understand there was some discussion in town meeting that, you know, the surrounding park is as important as, you know, what we do with the dam. And I think this provides us with one of the things that we need to do is provide a history of the area and the Native Americans that were in this area.
Thank you. Martin, and then Janine.
Yeah, I also just intrigued by the history. A lot of things I didn't know. But I also went back today and went through again the history from the Wellesley College student of the dam. And, you know, there's other eras of the dam's history. The industrial era is fascinating, but it really doesn't apply today. But the 1934 construction of the dam for recreation is intriguing. There are thousands of people who showed up. It sounds like it was one of the biggest events in town when that was opened, and people actually were willing to give up their salaries to build the thing. So there was clearly an interest in the recreational potential that the dam offered. You you know, I'm wondering what's changed. Probably something has changed. It's a different world, but I'm just interested in what those people thought and what they would think now and all that. And there's obviously many perspectives that we've got to be thinking about.
Thank you. Janine and then Terry.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, all the speakers, and so mind affecting. I'm a landscape architect, you know, and so I'm predisposed to see beauty as kind of that interface of design with nature. And and I lived on the river just downstream, so I'm kind of prepared for the change back, if that is the direction this goes, to a free-flowing river with added recreational functions, I guess. And I'm on the Historic District Commission, so we on the Historic District Commission sort of are accustomed to working on homes and so on. So this is sort of a resource that is a different kind of thing. The park has been an important aspect of our community center, and I look forward to working with the speakers, especially on how to provide appropriate recognition of the history and the recreational uses for the people of Natick, and have the river restored to a healthy circulation, and maintain the beauty of nature forever. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Janine. I think next is actually David, please, and then Mike. Sorry, David, caught you unaware.
No, I was prepared for you, I guess. Yeah, thanks to all the speakers. It's given us all a lot to reflect on, I'm sure. I'm not quite sure. It's made me feel very humble, I have to say. I think Janine put it very well. You know, perhaps we know what the right thing to do is. I don't know. Thank you. Still thinking on it.
Thank you. And I think I skipped Terry. Sorry, Terry. Terry and then Mike.
That's okay. I'll take wherever I land in the alphabet. No, I think that today's conversation took things kind of deeper and older than we'd gotten before. We were discussing this in so many ways as a contemporary issue, and this was a reminder of how much it is not. Several of you who are part of this committee know I give a walking tour around South Natick and talk about the river, talk about the dam, talk about the indigenous presence that predates the praying town. I will say that the longer I've done it, the more revisions I find, because there are kind of so many kind of stories to tell and memories to try to capture, and I find it's very humbling, because you think you understand and know the history of a place, and then can realize how easily, no, you don't. You have just kind of a thimbleful. And I think that this has been a good, gentle reminder of that. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mike, welcome.
Yeah, just thanks to all three of the presenters. I think it gave us all a little more to think about as this perspective of time sinks in. You know, when I look at this spillway, it's been there my whole life, and I've been a Natick resident my whole life, so it's easy to think, well, that's just the way it should be forever. Then you consider, you know, the river's been there for you know, eons, and people have been on the river for thousands of years along that time. But also, I think other people have mentioned it is, you know, as people look back 500 years from now, you know, will they say, hey, that town, you know, what did they do in 2021 to restore and make things right, or make things better by repairing in a fashion that the town and the future would be very happy with. So I still think, you know, the perspectives of both sides are real, but I certainly the humbling nature of the indigenous cosmovision, as she put it, was interesting to me. So one other thing I think I know Bill had mentioned at the top about GZA doing a couple proposals to kind of vet out some other options. Is part of that the you know, I've heard a lot of opinions that ODS will not allow trees on it during a repair process. And I think it hasn't gone out of the opinion realm as far as I can tell. I really looked for specific ODS input that says there absolutely cannot be trees in any iteration of the repair of the dam. So I think that's something that we need to consider. I don't know if that can be part of Bill's communication with GZA. But again, thank you to the three presenters.
Great, thank you. Maggie, closing thoughts?
Thank you very much, Kristen and David. I can't imagine how nervous or scary that would have been to share all of that. And I know that it enriched this process here, and hopefully people are taking that back and continuing to sit with it and think about it, all that you have shared. So thank you very much.
Thanks. There's nothing left to say, I don't think. I really appreciate how much everyone is holding a lot of complexity and a lot of different considerations and building a pretty robust picture. So thank you for your time, for your energy, for your good humor all around. And thanks to the public who are with us and following this so closely. We really appreciate you. And we will be seeing some of you at field trips and abutters meetings, and stay tuned for ongoing activities. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.